Welcome to Easily Entertained. My name is Bryson Olson, and here we talk about all things entertainment, specifically the good aspects, at least most of the time. Today, we definitely are. And as you read the title, we are talking about the new Demon Slayer movie, Infinity Castle, which was fantastic. And as some of you may know on this channel, I'm not the biggest fan of anime, but there are a few, Demon Slayer being one of them, that have got me hooked. And we'll talk a little bit about my bias on anime as well, but I mainly want to talk about the movie, so let's dive right in.
What's going on here? What happened to you?
So first off, the story of Infinity Castle is fantastic. Okay, it continues off where the show has left off, where everyone has now been obviously trapped in the Infinity Castle, and they have to make it through the night in order to get to Muzan Kibutsuji and do what they do best, kill him, slay that demon. But this movie, I believe, is supposed to be within a trilogy of movies that covers the last arc, and I'm excited because I feel like this one kicked it off amazingly. There was a lot of backstory, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. We get a lot of information on characters that we've seen before and ones that we've only partially seen before, and I think it allowed us to slow down and see the bigger picture with some things, which I thought was fantastic. Characters like Shinobu with her fight with Doma, and we also get some backstory on him. You get to see her motivation for becoming a Hashira. You get to see why this fight is so significant for her. And by the way, I do know that Demon Slayer is a manga. I have not read it. I know the story is technically, I think, over in that. I don't want to read it because I don't want to know. I would rather just wait until the movies come out. I think that, for me personally, is going to be way more fun. But anyways, so we get to see a little bit of the backstory around them. Doma was actually who killed Shinobu's sister, and that's kind of the first major fight that we see is between them. And it also means you get to see Shinobu's crazy poison tactics. She's always been kind of a small person, and so she relied more on the sticking back and figuring out how to make her attacks more impactful. She uses a custom poison for every demon that she beats. Excuse me. And I think that is so cool, and it gives a lot to her character. She's small, she's insect breathing, and she's a small character, kind of like an insect, like a butterfly, and using that kind of thing just allows her story to then be propelled forward when she's facing this larger than life kind of opponent. Whereas Doma, like I said, he's kind of larger than life. He's not super flamboyant because he's pretty not monotone, but he's unemotional, and then he's fighting Shinobu, who's obviously very emotional because he killed her sister. So you get kind of that contrast between their stories going on, which I think allows you to just be more invested when certain things happen. And we've gotten some of that in the rest of the show, but it wasn't for these characters specifically. You didn't get a lot, so that's kind of what this movie tackled, which I thought was awesome. You also have little backstory moments with Zenitsu and his opponent, what the heck was his name, Kaigaku, who was his brother, because they were both raised by their grandpa learning to do thunder breathing. And Zenitsu always wanted to be like Kaigaku, and they get to face off, and it's kind of that they started together and they're ending together, basically. Zenitsu doesn't die, but you know what I'm saying. They have to face off each other because Kaigaku kind of was a traitor to the Demon Slayers because he turned over to becoming a demon, and says his power increased so much with having thunder breathing as a demon, that kind of stuff. But like I said with the previous one, you get that contrast of each other and their different stories, and how Zenitsu probably could have gone the same way as Kaigaku, because he even he only had one ability. So what if he wanted to become a demon in order to master the other abilities? Or, you know, it's like they're parallels to each other, and because they're brothers, it kind of adds to that as well. And I think that ends up making us even more intrigued. And I believe in the manga, it's like a very brief, like 1 page of that story where Zenitsu just kills Kaigaku, but they kind of flesh it out a little bit more in the movie, which I think is good. Some people are like, why did this take so long? And I'm like, I don't think that's a terrible thing. You know, you get to be more invested in these characters. It's not just a throwaway, like, oh, hello, brother, and then kills them immediately. Like, I like giving more of that story to our characters. I think that just adds a lot more to it. But anyways, probably the biggest backstory thing, and it's really mainly what this movie is about, is Akaza, you know, Upper 3. We get to go back and see a lot of his story before he was a demon. And it makes sense why he is the way he is as a demon. You know, and his memory was erased from before his time, but he used to be a kid named Hakuji. And, you know, he's kind of a terrible person, but he was kind of trying to care for his grandpa, who then ended up dying, and so he kind of went a little bit nuts, but he got adopted, sort of, by this guy, Kaizo, who, you know, he teaches him some martial arts, and in exchange he needs to take care of Kaizo's daughter, Koyuki. I think that was how they pronounced her name, and I'm really sorry if it's not. But Hakuji and Koyuki, they fall in love, you know, and he finds something that's bigger than himself, and he feels like he's able to care for her because she's sick, and, you know, they kind of end up falling in love. And then what ends up happening is the well that is on the property gets poisoned while Hakuji is away. And he comes back, and the 2 people that gave him the time and cared about him are dead. And so he goes into this fit of rage, and then that ends up being like, oh, I don't care anymore. So he meets Muzan and gets turned into a demon. But then as a demon, that's why he's so obsessed with strength, because he never had enough strength before. He uses like a blood demon art that uses like the snowflake that was on Koyuki's, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She had like a little barrette or kind of thing, like a little hair ornament, and it had a snowflake on it. And so it's like, it's all tying back into that. And it then makes so much sense as to why he is the way he is. Even though he does forget everything, it's still a part of his character as a demon. And while you're like, well, I'm excited for him to lose, it's so sad because his backstory is just so tragic. It makes you feel for him as a villain. Like, he's still in the wrong, but you can see how you would have gone down the same kind of path. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, this movie is like 80% backstory and only 20% action. But that's not a bad thing. We get to learn a lot about these characters. And for me personally, who only recently got into Demon Slayer, like, getting to slow down over a movie and learn a lot more about this character, I think just was super helpful, at least for me. And maybe it was for some of you who watched it, but it allowed me to really feel for this character, even though I've only seen him like a handful of times. And that is like the kind of movie this is, that I love when movies can do that. And when you barely know a character, but they still find a way to tell it in a way that, you know, can leave you in tears, can make you feel something. And that's fantastic. You know, the backstory alone, wonderful. But, you know, I mentioned the action. We're going to get into that. So now it's no surprise that a Demon Slayer movie has just some impeccable animation. Okay, they absolutely do a fantastic job, and it's not even a surprise, even remotely. You know, we all knew it was going to have some amazing animation. I feel like Demon Slayer is just one of the best animated shows ever, anime or otherwise. I think it is just a fantastically animated show. I think that's one reason why it draws me in more than a lot of other animes do. Like I've said, anime is not my forte probably most of the time, but that doesn't mean I can't like anime. I like Demon Slayer, I like Attack on Titan, and I find that those two are like really well animated. I recently got into Jujutsu Kaisen, which is also a pretty good one. You know, these are really well animated, and like, yeah, they're all fighting shows, and I think that tends to add into it a little bit too, but also the animation, I think, is what also sells that for me. I like the really good animation. The animes that tend to be a lot more simple in their animation style is not saying that they're bad, it's just for me, it's harder for me to be engaged, you know. And I think I started rewatching Attack on Titan again just because I think, like Demon Slayer, that one's really well animated and it's probably one of my favorites. Demon Slayer is probably my favorite now, but before it was definitely Attack on Titan. But what I've noticed in all of these two is in their animation, they use lighting a lot more. It is not as flat as a lot of other animes can be. And it's throughout the whole show. I feel like a lot of anime, they save the budget for other moments, you know, big key fights or big key emotional moments. And, you know, sometimes that's great. But I like how Jujutsu Kaisen and Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan all have really good animation throughout. And I think a lot of that is due to lighting. There are other factors, but I think lighting is a big thing because it makes it feel more real. You can be immersed a little bit better because there is now depth, not only to the story, because I feel like a lot of anime has really good story to it, but it also uses the imagery and adds depth in that way that makes it a lot more engaging. And that, I think, is something that all of these shows, and Demon Slayer in particular, especially in this movie, did fantastically. And that also helps the action, you know? We talk about the action a little bit, and I think that does a fantastic job. And I think in this one in particular, they tried to show the speed a lot, which I thought was so fun because you can have like the power a lot too. And I think the power is mainly shown in the Akaza fight between Tanjiro and Giyu. I think they do fantastic with showing the power of not just Akaza, but of Tanjiro and Giyu. You also have their speed, and you get like their battle strategies, almost like when Tanjiro goes into the transparent world and can kind of see all that when he figures all that out. And I love that moment. But I also think speed is a huge thing in this one. And it kind of, you know, throughout the entire show, it kind of makes sense. They're playing with speed in how it's being told. You have high speed action, but then when the backstory happens, it slows down a lot, and then you ramp up and you jump back in and there's a lot of speed again, and that is fantastic. I like that it correlates with the tone of the story. I think the two biggest ones that show off speed are the Shinobu fight with Doma, because she is moving crazy fast, which ends up making some awesome fight choreography. And then you have Zenitsu, who is very famously known for his thunderclap and flash thunder breathing technique, which makes him increasingly fast. And so you kind of get that, which is a super interesting fight. But also, on top of the animation being incredible with the action scenes, it helps to amplify the emotional scenes as well. You have Shinobu's backstory where her perspective gets like faded on the edges a little bit, which like could be taken in several different ways. Could be seen as like the memory of her sister being skewed, her perspective and kind of narrow focus because of Doma is how it's being portrayed in the animation. And I think that helps to amplify her story a lot because she is so, her emotions are really high during her fight, and so that makes a lot of sense. But then you get a different kind of thing with Akaza's memory, you know, being Hakuji and his love story with Koyuki. I cannot pronounce that name correct. I just can't do it on the first try for some reason. But anyways, their love story, everything's super clear, but you get these super beautiful moments of like the reflections in the eyes. You get the little like subtle eye shake that shows like that emotion behind people. You get the really good lighting of like a fireworks of fighting like with emotion, not fighting like as you're out just to fight, but fighting like for something, for his grandfather or for Kaizo and Koyuki. But the emotion behind that, I think, just adds so much. And when it's paired with the animation that is used to amplify that emotion, it just makes the story like every moment I was engaged. There was not a moment where I felt like I was pulled out of the movie, even though it was a lot of backstory. I think there was a few moments where like their pacing was a little weird in that aspect. Like they would jump back to reality and then they jump back like super soon afterwards. And I'm like, I would have rathered you just stay in the backstory for a moment and then do all of it at once. And it's like, I understand why they did it, but at the same time, I'm like, could have done that better. But anyways, the animation plus the story just merge in perfect harmony in it. Is absolutely beautiful. It was fantastic. So now, what does this mean for anime movies overall? I think we're going to see some major changes because not all animes get movies, which is kind of interesting. In particular, they don't all get dubbed releases or even subbed releases. And me personally, I'm a dub watcher because I would rather watch it in my own language personally. If you watch it subbed, that's fine. I like the dubbed versions. I know people are like, I hate the voice acting in it. I never have a problem. I haven't run into it, at least with Demon Slayer anyway, or in any of the shows that I like. But overall, I like the dubbed versions. But I think seeing how big the opening was and people turning up to it in droves, I think it was like the highest anime movie opening of all time for Japan, which I think is crazy awesome. And it's kind of continued on that path, which I think is awesome. It also shows that, like, for American audiences, what matters is the quality. You know, it's not just, oh, it's the same property that we've been using over and over. Oh, we're using the same A-list actors. Like, it is just about, they made amazing animation. They made amazing story. The music's awesome. And it's all you need. You know, you don't need to make something that is exactly like everything else. And I think that's fantastic. You know, Studio Ghibli, anyways, has kind of shown this all along. You know, they release movies usually dubbed and are usually released for American audiences, like Spirited Away or Ponyo or The Boy and the Heron. They do awesome. You know, people love going to those movies. They're so emotionally impactful. The animation, like these movies, are fantastic. But they've kind of been the main player in that genre of movies for American audiences anyway for a long time. So this kind of movie, Demon Slayer, you know, being released, you know, the Sony being in charge of like the English dub and distribution out here, I think is incredible. And the fact that it's been so well received makes them realize that anime is a worthwhile venture for cinema, in at least in, you know, in America, in international audiences. But I think what it does really, like a really good impact that it does, not just as like movies, but for the animation, the anime industry as a whole, I think, like I said, further amplifies that need for quality. And I'm not I'm not going to say anything about any other animes because I haven't watched a lot of anime, so I can't really say that. But of the ones that I have seen, or at least seen snippets of, when the quality is high, that's when I'm the most interested in it. And I'm not just saying like it has to look like it was made with hundreds of millions of dollars. I definitely don't think that has to be the case. But I want you to utilize what you got, you know, be creative. Invincible, arguably, has way worse animation, but their story is awesome, and that's what hooks me on that, you know. And I want that good story. I want at least semi-decent animation most of the time. If they have to dull it down, but then, like, you know, fight scenes and stuff are fantastic. If the story's selling me, I can deal with that, you know. But that is why the ones that I really like, their animation quality is usually top tier. But a movie like this, I think, can push for studios to put more budgets into things and let them turn out a little bit better. And I think that could be awesome. You know, I'm hoping that is what happens. I'd like to get more into certain animes because some of them, the ideas are there and I want to try more, but sometimes it's not enough to get me in. Obviously, I don't speak for everybody, but I feel like that is a pretty common mindset. So we could see how it goes. You know, we could see how it goes. But overall, Demon Slayer Infinity Castle did fantastic on all of those fronts, and I'm hoping that the momentum from this movie will let them release it hopefully as soon as possible. You know, they have an idea of like 2027 and 2029. I wanted to get it as soon as possible. So, you know, if they could, you know, give them a good enough budget and make it on time, I think that'd be great. At least for me personally. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, absolutely fantastic. I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited for myself to get into more anime. And, you know, maybe we'll talk about some more anime shows on here. If you got a good suggestion of an anime for me, you know, like I said, the ones that I've watched and that I've very much enjoyed, Attack on Titan, this one, Demon Slayer, and Jujutsu Kaisen, pretty good. If you have other ones that are on similar lines, and it could be story, animation, could be the fighting or whatever, the action. If you have good recommendations, I'd like to hear them. But warning you, I will watch the dubbed versions. I will never be watching subbed versions. I'm so sorry. Anyways, Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, fantastic. Let's talk about our rating for that. If you don't know our easily entertained rating scale from least to best, it is garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day every day. And Demon Slayer Infinity Castle, for me, some of the pacing gets a little off, but I do like it. So it's pretty freaking good. So it's really up there. It has to be at a go-to for me. I absolutely loved Infinity Castle. You know, if you have a different rating, you let me know down in the comments, okay? I want to know. And before we go, I had to make a quick statement. I know it's been like a month since I've released an episode, and I'm sorry about that. I have cool things going on in my life right now. I run my own media agency, like a media marketing agency, which is super fun, and I basically get to make videos and content for a living for other companies. You know, we work with businesses and stuff, and that's super fun. But in particular, the last month we got really busy really fast, which caused me to not be able to get out an episode, which I don't love because I love doing this kind of stuff. And so I'm still going to be releasing episodes, but just as a warning for those that have watched me for a while and do want to continue watching, they may end up being a little more sporadic. I'm hoping we can eventually get this channel like at least sort of monetized or a sponsor or something so that I can pay an editor to help me with this kind of stuff, and then, you know, potentially they could come out more frequently, and all I have to do is record, and I can pass that off and that kind of thing. But, you know, that's future stuff. You know, we're not going away. I'm just warning, they may not be every Tuesday like I had originally been doing for a long time. But we're not going anywhere. We're still going to be releasing stuff. They will still be usually released on Tuesday. It'll be Tuesday or Wednesday most likely for most episodes, so just keep that in mind. And with that said, that is it for this episode of Easily Entertained. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe so you can be notified of new episodes when they drop. No longer every Tuesday, but whenever they do drop. I'm hoping for at least 2 episodes a month. They'll usually be on Tuesday, so, you know, stick around. That's why you got to turn that notification bell on so you can be notified when a new episode drops. But that is it for this episode of Easily Entertained. Until next time, bye.